Just like a Clockwork Orange starts with the scene of them consuming intoxicants. At the Moloa bar. I'm just at my mom's basement, smoking a spliff, herbal spliff, and talking about the Clockwork Orange. Now, in the last episode, I gave a theoretical framework for the things I was going to talk about in this video. And I talked about how women and men are divided in the tribe's land in their normal day-to-day activities. So I explained how we are living in an artificial system, but in a natural system, the woman and the children, the woman managing the little children, are usually gathering food and things, for the benefit of the tribe. And same thing today, we see shopping. Women are still doing the same thing, they're still gathering items, but it's been manipulated by the consumeristic system, not to serve the tribe, but to serve their own narcissistic and vain desires, That's what it's all about. So that's what the women do. So now, in today's society, we see how women are treating grown men as children. And usually these are feminist women who tend not to have their own children. So as you can see, this basic human drive for the woman to be the mother and boss little children around has been manipulated to serve as managers over the rest of society. And their motherly instinct has been turned against the society to basically henpeck at men and keep them in their submissive slave state, basically. So in this artificial system, that's the main cause, the fact that we're living an artificial, not our natural lifestyle. That's the main cause we have all these mental diseases and mental illnesses. For example, depression, all the various, like one-third of the population is suffering from depression. Now that's not normal, That's not how the tribals live. They don't suffer from all these diseases. Insomnia, depression. They'll laugh if you talk about premature ejaculation, It's just stupid. So, like I said in the previous video, in the natural tribal setting, there's always a slight danger, of natural calamities or of the invading tribes who are enemy tribes who come into your land. So there's always that real world threats out there that they experience once in an occasional blue moon, which keeps them on their toes, which the artificial system has tried to recreate, but it just makes us more insane, and creates more stress instead of the natural heightened awareness that the natural threats cause to us. So I talked in a previous video about how one of the greatest sexual fantasies most women have is to be raped, and you think about that, it's like, what the fuck, that's like the number one thing women are supposed to be afraid of, but yet is their number one fantasy, It's just because that's how their minds work, Like I said, once in a while there's a threat of the invading tribes, so once in a while there would always be that threat, and once she or she would be victims of that occasional rape that would happen when there was battles between wars, tribes, and stuff. But in today's civilization, that doesn't happen at all, and there's no threat at all in most of the places that the women go to. So it's like that suppression of a natural part of human life in the past, which has been excluded from this artificial system, has created a deviancy, a disease, where women have a sexual desire to be raped, fantasy to be raped. So similarly, the young men, what would they do? They would basically not have women yet because they haven't proved their worth to the tribe yet, or shown their leadership prowess yet. So usually they would just be trying to develop themselves as men, and they would be trying to look up to other men and following their lead. And these other men would be on the periphery of the tribe, working on their skills, hunting, or engaging in certain ritual ceremonies, or stuff like that. So these men would be basically fighters. They would love war, when they would love to show them their power in battle or in hunting, and those kind of things. So violence was a natural part of human male society all the time, and males are more savage in general. So we see how in the Alex and his droogs, how those natural violent forces have been let loose, how they're running loose in society. And in my last video, I did say that Alex was a good guy, and he's like the red-pilled X-Man, the illuminated man, or at least the one-eyed man can see. The one-eyed man is the king in the land of the blind, so he's the actual king, But there's also the evil system, to whom he's a threat and a target. So that whole thing is shown beautifully in that movie, and a tyrannical, degraded, broken down society is also shown very beautifully in that society. So I'm going to talk about that in just a second. All right, so in most in most descriptions of the movie, you'll see Alex described as a sociopath, psychopath, who is, subjugated to a certain experimental process to fix his disease, but it backfires, and you know, and basically the theme is the theme of the movie is good versus evil. How to correct, how to. It's kind of like reformation, how to reform somebody. That's what it's about, actually. So I'm like the only person who's probably ever said that Alex is like the good guy. He's like a Jesus figure in this movie. Actually, no, there's probably many people who've said that, but I'm arguing this less viewed perspective of Alex, because when you look at the condition of the society that he lives in and the people around him, you see that no one's perfect. Everyone is steeped in sin, corrupted, sold, and they have sold their souls to participate in the system because they enjoy what the system provides, and I'm going to talk about that. I already talked about the artificial system and how it favors the psychopathic deviant personality types versus the natural system of the tribal societies living out of nature, and more patriarchal societies in general. They have more law and order and discipline and more masculine energy, basically. Even though civilization in general is a masculine concept, um, yeah, especially Western society and civilization, very individualistic. So yeah, so look at the people around him. Most people think that the world is a place where most people are good. But look at Alex and everybody around Alex. Okay, let's look at starting with the hobo. One of the first scenes in the movie is where he talks to the hobo, right? And at this point, he's still immature. He believes in violence and just taking what you can. He's just like a happy-go-lucky kid with these inner drives of violence and sex let loose. Because like the hobo says, so hobo's just singing, and then Alex and his thugs kind of surround him and corner him, and they start bullying him and start threatening him with weapons, and he's like, yeah, kill me, I don't care, I don't want to live in a dirty ass world like this. And then Alex is like, oh yeah, what's so dirty about this world? And he's like, oh, it's dirty because it lets the young people bully the old people. It lets the rich oppress the poor. It's doing all these. It's saying that it's doing all these great things like sending the man into space and into the moon and satellites and all that. But here on Earth, they're not taking care of humans. People are starving. People are suffering in all kinds of ways, which can be easily solved. But yet they're sending people on the moon. So he's like, So in that little scene right there, you kind of see a poor man's perspective, a old poor man who's lived a long time and seen the world, and what he sees the world is really like. It's a really ugly place. So that is like the background, That kind of explains the background in just one little speech. Then we see the counselor, the educational system. The counselor who is all up in his business, just because he's a dependent, he's not an adult yet. He hasn't been adulterated yet completely. So the counselor is there waiting for him because he's been skipping school. So the counselor is there in his house, right when he gets out of his bed. He's there in the living room. And then he even molests him and bullies him and belittles him, which is very common in the educational system. It's like, there's something wrong with you, little boy. Why aren't you like everybody else here? There's something wrong with you. Meanwhile, this hypocrite, he doesn't see how he's a control freak, telling other people how to live their lives or what is good and what is bad, when he himself is not living by any certain code. He doesn't have any values based on his actions. He's come off as a coward, as a hypocrite, and as a liar. And the cops who take him in, they're totally dishonest. They break the laws. They're bullies, and they're cowards too. And they're corrupt. Yeah, they're they're not integral people, and you see that in their interaction with them. Then Alex's droogs, Now, there's a scene where Alex's droogs rebel against Alex because of Alex criticizing one of them, and a little bit of power politics and tension between a couple of them. But then instead of Alex challenges them on the issue, but he backs down. But then he later comes back after talking behind the scenes with the other droogs, and then they turn against Alex, and they do like a feminine version of subversion, whereas Alex is a very masculine character. But they go behind the scenes, they gossip, they gang up together, and they subvert, and use deception, and then they put him through an inquisition, all feminine tactics, So when So he agrees to this, Alex, but later he stabs them, and he basically, turns their game against them, basically, because they threaten him with force, 3 against 1. So he uses force on them. So I don't think he was wrong in that case. He was just exerting his leadership, in a unruly kind of, and his unruly followers, who were trying to basically go from the patriarchal system to a democratic system, which obviously leads to a tyrannical system, which is where we are today, seeing very clearly, which George Orwell talked about too in 1984. So yeah, in this civilization we see how sex and drugs have been let loose on the people, and so the kids, the thugs, the people in the underground society, they're using rape and violence on the general population, and robbery. They're basically, so what is happening is basically these boys have not been raised with strong father figures. They're living in a democratic, not in a democracy, but a democracy that's devolving into a tyrannical society, and therefore the patriarchal system has long been crushed, and therefore there's less father figures. Therefore the boys aren't being raised to be responsible citizens, so they're just engaging in the natural male role of being the warriors and the hunters and the protectors and the fighters, basically, the guarders of the society. So since there's no strong positive role models leading in that direction, I guess they don't need people for the military right now. So they're resorting to the nightlife and the drugs and the rape and the violence in the night, and running from the law, thug life, basically. So it's all a result of lack of fathers, strong male role models in the society. And we can see all the role models are corrupt in Alex's life. I've already just given many examples so far. His own father, same thing. And the same thing with the single mother families today. We see how the high rate of gangs and crime are in these single mother households because they don't have, and in the black community because they don't have strong male role models. That was all been destroyed decades ago, and now that those symptoms are going out in the whole society today, So sex, drugs, and violence have always been part of human nature, and suppressing them just creates deviancies like fantasizing about rape or murder porn and all that stuff. So I already told you what Alex represents. Alex represents illuminated man. Why? Because he's a principled guy, right? He has principles. He doesn't hit Alex just just because he's bored and feeling bad. He hits Georgie or whoever, Dim. He hits Dim because Dim was being disrespectful to some fine arts, to Beethoven. And then he also is intelligent, very sees through the BS. He's cultured. He has his natural human aggression left, which has been beaten out of the rest of the society, through this being raised up and adulterated to be adults. And he's a leader. He's not a follower. So that is a threat to the ruling oligarchy, That is a threat in the commoner's population. So therefore, we see the other theme in the movie where the government is trying to solve the problems which their predecessors created. They're trying to solve this problem of crime by getting to the root of crime. So in the prison scene, we see how the politician comes in and talks about the problems of how the prisons aren't really curing anybody, and everybody knows it. So the prison guard says, "Yeah, sir, we need more money because you're not helping us enough. We need more resources to secure these people." And the politician's like, "Nah, that's BS. We don't need that. I know a better solution. what you have to do with these common criminals for whom we won't have room anymore because now we're going to have political prisoners filling up the prisons. Right? Communism. So for these common criminals, we just have to kill the criminal instinct. So tamper with the head, you know. The same thing with communism and scientific socialism, you know. If you look at the book called Ghost in the Machine by Arthur Koestler, he talks about how in a future idealistic utopia society, in the near future, we're already using methods of deactivating certain parts of the brain which give you your your instinct to fight back against authorities and people who want to oppress you. So the instinct to get angry about issues, the instinct to um, be individualistic, for example, these things are being destroyed in the human brain, critical thinking and so forth. And group consensus-based emotionalism is being promoted, as we can see today in the mental illness of the young people today. So that was an interesting scene too, where he talks about how he had to kill the criminal reflex, and then we see how the scientists go on to do just that to Alex in the movie. Another interesting book is Bertrand Russell. He has some interesting books. One of them is The Impact of Science on Society, where he talks about scientific socialism and using drugs, diet, and injunctions to basically neutralize any threat amongst the animals, the proles, the common people. And 1984 talks about that in great detail, obviously. But yeah, that was kind of interesting how we see the scientific socialism in this movie, because that violence and sex instinct is a threat. 1984 talks a lot about that sex instinct and how it is a threat. Brave New World, not really, but some other books like this movie definitely is one of the best movies talking about that violence instinct, you know. Another movie is Network. In there, it's a great movie overall to understand, you know, the brainwashing through the media and the world we live in, the current system. But in there, there's a scene where he talks about how, everybody out there who's watching me, a popular radio anchor or news anchor, they're always blaming somebody. You know, they're saying, "Oh, it's the fault of the communists. It's the fault of the liberals. It's the fault of the Christians," you know, and so forth, of the Nazis, of the KKK. You know, they're just blaming other people. They're just trying to find who to blame. But he says, now that's not gonna solve anything. You know, I don't know who's causing all this. All I know is that first and foremost, you have to stop blaming and you have to start getting angry. You have to get angry and you have to recognize that you're a living, conscious human being, and you're adult, you're a grown human being, and you deserve certain rights, and you have certain requirements, not requirements, but you have certain rights that other people cannot step on, and now we got to stop hiding and we got to start getting angry. And it's a great scene where everybody gets all hyped up, but that's very important, that instinct to be angry when somebody steps on you. That had been beaten out of most of us right in elementary school, and definitely by middle school. And if anything, any hint of disrespect stepped in high school, then that got nipped in the bud right away, or you got kicked out of school right away. So they didn't tolerate it at all at that level. So in this movie, they kind of show you how these scientists are trying to solve the problem of evil, which they, being evil themselves and in power and in control of the system, we see all the people. The jailer is pretty evil. He seems like a bit of a pervert. Who else? The pastor seems to be the only good guy except Alex. He's like the Jesus figure, and Alex is like his disciple almost, like a Peter going into the world. But yeah, except pastor, every authority figure you see in the book is pretty much corrupt and evil, and therefore it's like these people in authority are trying to solve the problem of evil basically by destroying the human brain, so it cannot defend itself and it cannot reproduce itself, procreate. Both those instincts were being attacked um, in the guise of killing the criminal reflex, which was basically any threat could be labeled as a criminal, because we saw how the other criminals, his followers, his droogs, the other three dudes, two of them who framed him and who turned against him, who were basically one with this whole sadomasochistic culture, they ended up becoming cops, corrupt cops, because they didn't have any criminal record on them. They were corrupt individuals, and there were stories of cops coming and beating people and torturing people, but as long as no one cares about their character, they just care about what's on the record and how you have been labeled the scarlet letter or not. We see how they're also turn out against him. So the whole world turns against him, just like Jesus. That's why I kind of compared them to him. We see the tyrannical society, drugs and sex everywhere. Even the interesting scene is where he comes back to the journalist, and the journalist, who we thought was a decent guy, but as soon as he finds out Alex is this guy who has been used by the politicians with the brain technique, he basically he acts like he cares about Alex and takes him in, but he just wants to use Alex to basically for his side of the other side of the politician, the other side of the politics, because he's a journalist and a book writer, so he gains publicity. And I think the guy who played this character in the movie was the actual Stanley Kubrick. I'm not sure what he looks like, but I think I heard that he was the actual character, because he plays roles in the movies too. So I think that was him, and that was his admission of guilt of being part of this evil system. Even though he reveals so much about the evil in the world and the system that other people don't talk about, but he also admits his guilt that he's also part of the system, and he's only being allowed to do all of this part of Hollywood and all that. So yeah, that was an interesting thing, how he's also an opportunist, and the journalist is another opportunist and another politician who is just playing the good guy to get the other party back in power. He's just playing the other side of the coin, basically, the same bullshit system. But yeah, the pastor and the criminals in the jail are interesting, because they're all against it. They all laugh at the pastor, but Alex is like the only guy who actually listens to the pastor, because he's an intelligent guy. He likes to learn, and he has that human, curiosity. So he gets a lot from reading the Bible, but all the other sheeple, basically the proles in the prison, they just laugh at the preacher, and they're afraid of the jailer. Whereas he's not afraid of the jailer, because he has certain values and he sees above all that. But what they're showing you in this movie is a tyrannical system where sadomasochism rules. Sadists rise to the top, and everybody else becomes a masochist. The hobo wants to be killed. Alex's droogs, they want to beat people up, or if they're threatened by a bigger force, they want to join the force and shut up. So that's all that's all shown in that movie, right, very well. And so yeah, they just they obey the orders, and they are good cops, even though they get to torture people and use their authority and get paid. So it's all good, for them. But not for Alex, who keeps suffering and keeps. And even when he was being brainwashed, he starts talking in such a way that he starts showing the other people that he's starting to get conscience. His conscience is starting to wake up, because kids normally don't have developed consciences. It's only after certain amounts of experience in the world and certain amount of tragedies that they are forced to look at themselves when they start to develop their conscience, and it forces them to look back on their life. So when Alex is put through this torture, he starts showing these scientists that his conscience is awakened with the things he's saying, which he never said before. But the scientists don't believe him, and they continue thinking that they know better than he does, and they continue playing God with his brain, and lead to the tragedy at the end of the movie, where now Alex becomes the hero because everything is exposed. And that's basically what Jesus represents, the immortal man. Because now Alex has become immortal because he has gained victory over the whole world. Because the whole politician was proved wrong because the other journalist showed everybody by torturing Alex. And see, the other journalist, because he wasn't willing to forgive Alex either, because he realized that Alex raped his wife, which led to worse things in the future for him. So he blamed it all on Alex and was willing to kill Alex. So we see how evil everybody is and just out for themselves in the world. And Alex is just framed for being the bad guy because he's a threat to the power structure, because he can actually challenge them. And he has been challenging them by not playing the game, basically. So yeah, that's an interesting take on the movie, where Alex is the good guy, and where we see the whole agenda of scientific socialism to create the brave new world citizen, the perfect little docile, androgynous citizen who just takes, just thinks everything is awesome, where they're really being enslaved and treated very poorly. So yeah, that was my analysis of A Clockwork Orange, the themes of sex and violence, and how those are being targeted in our current modern world. I mean, there's very few movies that you watch that touch you to the core, and usually you get a negative reaction, like a disgust or a horror feeling when you see these things. The first time I had that kind of feeling was when Christians came to my elementary private school, and it was just my school, I think, was like a science type of school, but it was K through 12. But I was like in, I don't know, like 5th grade or something, 4th grade or 6th grade, where I saw this movie, or maybe it was in my community theater, but I saw this movie when I was a little kid, and it was basically showing the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. They showed every single nail being violently driven into the hands of Jesus, and Bollywood movies are full of violence, fake violence, where it's all this BS and blood and all that, a little bit of bruises and all that, but it's totally fake, and even the sound effects are fake. But when I saw that Jesus being crucified and the whole story leading up to that point, I probably had something to do with my emotional reaction, and that really touched me in disgust and horror and everything. And I hadn't felt that until I was sitting with my boys. One of them, ironically, was named Alex, and he was quite a red pill guy too. And I was sitting at my buddy's house and other buddy's house, and we were smoking up and watching this movie. And then I see this violence and everything in the movie, and all the stuff, and I just couldn't watch it. I just stopped watching it. My mom had that reaction to American Beauty when there was the first naked girl scene, and I had that reaction with violence because I haven't gotten over the violence yet myself. So that was one of the few movies that touched me like that. That's why I think it's a great movie for you to watch and learn from and think about. Peace. And I mentioned some books: Burton Russell, Arthur Koestler, Ghost of the Machine, to learn about how science is being used to target the human brain with injections, with diet, with our pollution in the air and in the water and everything. All right, later.